Welcome to the Nutrition and Wellness for Recovery meeting. My name is Lulu Cook. I am a dietitian and counselor, and I come to you each week bringing actionable skills and strategies and information to support physical and mental health in recovery, really looking at that intersection of the mind and the body and how we can really thrive and have a happy, healthy, high energy recovery at every level. So I have a long history in the rooms myself. It's been 20 years since I last had to pick up my drugs of choice, and continue to be involved in a variety of 12-step and other recovery-oriented fellowships. My Buddhist community, where I teach meditation, the treatment center that I work at, really just surrounded by the wonderful vibe of recovery. So today we'll give some evidence-based information about depression particularly, and how that can intersect with recovery, how it can intersect with some of the struggles we face around addiction. We'll have first some information that I will present, then time at the end for general questions or sharing. If you have a really specific question about anything I bring up today or about your own situation, welcome to email me at lulu@gutfeelingcoaching.com or message me here, and we'll get that information to you, get you some answers. Some technical things: please use the chat box as we go along, the little instant message box in the bottom right hand corner of your screen. I do keep an eye on that, and then we'll save the out loud questions for the end so that I can make hopefully a clean recording here and be able to post the video later in case you wanted to refer back to it or haven't had the chance to watch it live. So just want to flag, we're talking about depression today, and right off the bat I'll say, much like there's overlap with addiction, there's also overlap with anxiety, and we're not going to focus so much on anxiety today. That would be a whole separate topic, because the ways that we approach it from a natural strategies approach is a little bit different. So there'll be some overlap there, but not too much. We're going to define our terms and look at how recovery relates with all of this. And just the flag, this is general, not specific medical advice. Okay, got the preliminaries out of the way, and I have to say, one of the things I'm excited about this talk is that, as it turns out, I have 12 steps to healing depression naturally to share with you today. So I didn't know, as I started pulling the research together on this, that we'd come up with 12 steps, but gotta love that, right? The co-occurrence of depression with addiction is really common, and recovery is possible. Recovery from both is possible for most of us. Natural approaches are part of a really robust solution and really robust foundation for any of us to stay mentally healthy, no matter what challenges we might be starting with in that regard. And I just also want to say, I'll come back to this again, the approaches we'll talk about today, we could think of them as sowing seeds to create that garden of health. They're not magic wands or switches like some of us are accustomed to from our substances of choice. We just flip that switch and we feel different, we feel better. And these strategies aren't that. They're seeds that we sow and take care of and nurture over time, so that we end up with a really healthy and robust mental ecosystem. So there's no one right answer. We're going to present a lot of ideas today, and each of us will have different ones that resonate for us. Defining our terms, just like there's no one right answer or one right solution, there's also no one single definition of what depression is or what it feels like. All depression is not the same, and a one prescription fits all approach, many of us will have experienced that doesn't work for us. Additionally, we have a cultural focus that can make it seem like something's wrong when we're having really natural feelings of sadness, grief, fear, and certainly when we're new in recovery or even a little farther along the way. So normal and natural to have those, I'll put air quotes here, those negative emotions, those difficult or painful emotions. So natural to have those arise after all that time we spent numbing them. And that doesn't necessarily mean there's anything wrong with us that needs to be medicated. Although medication is definitely part of the solution and it saves lives for some people. So we'll just get into that the littlest bit to have a sort of a framework for the rest of our discussion. When we're talking about the definition, if you have a diagnosis of any particular type of depression, there's over 100 different specific kinds of depression you could be diagnosed with. Recurrent, persistent, dysthymia, which is a chronic low-level sort of depression, postpartum depression, major depressive disorder, bipolar depressive disorders, mild, moderate, and severe levels of most of these. Lots of different kinds that we could have official diagnoses of, and those diagnoses come out of the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. Many of us may have had that diagnosis offered at some point in our life based on the frequency and the severity and the duration of particular symptoms. Others of us might have had the exact same symptoms and not been given a diagnosis, and others of us will have just a different experience altogether. Maybe we're struggling with seasonal affective disorder. Maybe we have situational depression where we're faced with changes in our lives. And again, I see this so often in early recovery, really coming up for air, our heads clear, and it can be just shocking and so painful to see where we are in our lives. And you add to that the fact that in early recovery from particular substances especially, we'll have some hormonal and neurotransmitter imbalance, which means that we just may not be able to feel pleasure the same way. We're used to those real highs from our drugs of choice. And when we take those out and our hormones aren't rebalanced, we can have what's called anhedonia. It's the lack of ability to take pleasure and take pleasure in the simple things. So that kind of just low level, low quality of life feeling, I think is part of what many of us might experience in early recovery. Depression is experienced more commonly by women than men. The prevalence rates are around 10% for women and 5% for men, although men may simply be underdiagnosed. Anger gets missed for many men as being actually an indicator of depression. And just to finish this piece off, for the purposes of this talk, I'll be using depression in a really general, broad umbrella kind of way. I'm not talking about any specific diagnosis or lack of diagnosis. We're going to look at the strategies that can help any of us, wherever we are in that picture of the different kinds of depression there are. I want to get really clear on the negative spiral of depression and addictive disorders. There is an avalanche of research around this. And whilst the numbers vary a little bit from what study you look at, it might be around 1/3 of people who have the diagnosis of major depressive disorder also experience alcoholism specifically. Those two have been widely studied. But there's similar data around drug addiction in general or other kinds of depression. But maybe up to 1/3 of people who have that real challenge with depression will also have real struggles with substance use. Possibly there's common neurobiological mechanisms at work. There's some little quirk in the wiring in the brain or the structure of the brain or the hormones in the brain that might be similar between both the depression experiences and the tendency toward those addictive behaviors. And unfortunately, these two often go together, and yet neither one of them is treated enough. neither condition, depression or substance abuse, receives adequate treatment. It's maybe 60% of people with depression who do not have substance abuse, only 60% of them would have received treatment in the past year. So 40% of people untreated. And then if you add on the factor of a depressed person with a substance use disorder, the amount of treatment, the level of treatment sinks even further. Maybe 55% of people who have both going on will receive treatment. And that's not looking at 12-step meetings and other community fellowships. That's really looking at official medical system treatments. And we see that those treatment rates are even lower for men. Men would be 13% less likely still than women to receive treatment if they have both of those conditions. People of color, economically disadvantaged people, all of that even further reduces the likelihood of treatment, which, that's just a tough truth, isn't it? And the reason why we care, besides the fact that it might be ourselves, it might be our loved ones suffering and struggling with these co-occurring conditions, but we also see there's an increased suicide risk in people who are experiencing both. We see that alcohol use at all has a direct lead into sadness and that lack of pleasure, even if it was just for a quote normie. Having those couple of drinks on a Friday impacts the ability to feel pleasure and increases the likelihood of sadness the next day. So then with people who have an actual dependence with alcohol or other drugs, we see that tendency toward a little sadness the next day, that just gets dug deeper and deeper and deeper. So the symptoms get worse for people who are struggling with both. We see that there may be a genetic risk for co-occurrence found in people of African American descent. They have not necessarily found the genetics indicating a link for both in other racial or ethnic groups. I don't think that's a huge data set yet. That's just one well-designed study that I reviewed. And I do, because most of the research is in white people and white middle-class people, I always do look for the places to highlight some of those differences so that those of us who might have a different kind of background might be able to imagine where we fit in with it. And I will say that this tendency toward co-occurrence of depression and addiction goes beyond just substances. For instance, gambling addicts, pathological gambling, are at an increased risk compared to people who do not have addiction disorders. They're at an increased risk of major depressive disorder, anxiety, emotional regulation difficulties, and other substance use disorders than people who are not pathological gamblers. And that kind of research is replicated in other ways, that whether it's a behavioral or a process or a substance addiction, really that's elevating the likelihood for the depressive disorders as well. Why? Why do these two go hand in hand? Well, we did touch on a little bit of the genetics, and certainly we do see independent genetic risk for substance use vulnerability, and we see genetic risk for depression separately. So they can come together in strange ways. We really need to look at the early isolation, attachment stress, what's called social status stress, chronic and mild ongoing stress, trauma, what we consider the adverse childhood experiences. These kinds of early experiences vastly raise the risk of both depression and substance use disorder for people who experience that as children. And there's some really direct physical, biological reasons why, if we're not experiencing the kind of loving care and attunement and protection and safety as vulnerable infants and young children, it actually changes the structure of our brain. It changes some of the circuitry through which our hormones and neurotransmitters work. So we start to see impaired dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, all of these different ways that our body and brain communicate about our emotional experience, those can all be radically altered by these adverse childhood experiences. And it really points to the fact some of us will have experienced that our addictions may have served a purpose at some point. They may have been part of a solution to a problem, the pain that we experienced at the time. And now, thank heavens, we're all sitting here in this room today, and we have some new options available to think about how we could tend to and care for that pain. So looking at these theories of mood disorders and depressions, since at least the 50s, there's been a big scientific search looking for the theory of everything. Where can we find the answer to depression? Early on, chemical imbalance came into highlight as a big possibility there, specifically serotonin. This is a neurotransmitter or hormone that is associated with feelings of well-being, contentment, and pleasure. But when we get a little more complex than that, we see that it helps regulate thinking and cognition. It regulates some of our reward, learning, memory pathways, and physiological processes, including some of our digestive processes, nausea processes. And this is perhaps linked with the fact that 80 to 90% of our serotonin is manufactured in the gut. So there's that real direct mind-body connection or gut-brain connection right there with the serotonin that we need to feel calm and balanced and happy. So serotonin became an early candidate for being, quote, the cause of depression. And we saw the big pharmaceutical companies just rush to the front, rush to the bank, really, with a series of antidepressant medications very much pointed toward regulating the serotonin levels. And in some ways, this might be very beneficial for those of us who struggle with depression or with addiction, because so many of the drugs of addiction deplete our serotonin, and we see clearly in the research that depleted serotonin is linked with depression. So alcohol, nicotine, marijuana, stimulants, they all deplete our serotonin balance over time. However, overall, the serotonin or chemical imbalance theory of depression has been largely discredited. It might be a little piece of the picture that some of us experience with that low mood, but for very few of us is it the one single thing. There are other mechanisms going on, other vulnerabilities, other things to consider. I think I'll leave that at that, except to reinforce why it matters for those of us with those histories of addiction. We see that stimulants like cocaine, methamphetamine, or MDMA, these increase dopamine, that's our reward hormone. They increase serotonin. This is right at the first instance of taking those stimulant drugs. And so in some regards, they almost act as an antidepressant right in that instance. They act similarly to what's called an SSRI, a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. That's the most common class of antidepressants right now, and it keeps more serotonin around and active in our brains longer. So these stimulant drugs can act in some ways as like an instant SSRI, but then that fades. Our brain actually tries to compensate for the surge of serotonin by putting in place mechanisms that will help pull the serotonin back down, because the brain wants to maintain homeostasis, or a level balance. So we're artificially bumping up that serotonin. The brain wants to go back down. So once the drug fades and passes, we've still got that native activity going on, pulling that serotonin down even further. So definitely we see that with the stimulants, once we are into withdrawal from those stimulants, serotonin levels are depleted and low. Opioids, similar situation in regards to the fact that with withdrawal from opioids, serotonin levels are absolutely depleted, even though the mechanisms around what opioids are doing with serotonin during use is less clear than some of the other drugs. And there's a real difference with the opioids between a sort of a one-time opioid use. Perhaps if you were on a brief course of opiate pain relief for a surgical procedure, difference between that versus chronic long-term opiate dependence in terms of the effect on serotonin. But definitely once you take the opiates out, the serotonin goes through the floor. Alcohol, similar picture, elevates serotonin and then it's depleted over time. And unfortunately with all of this, there is a lot of evidence linking serotonin levels and imbalanced serotonin with impulsivity and impulsive behaviors, not the least because we feel crummy when our serotonin is low and we're acting on some level to try to boost that back up. Can any of us imagine what could go wrong when an addict in withdrawal or an alcoholic in withdrawal with low serotonin, feeling crummy, had a little surge of impulsive behavior happening? Increases risk of relapse, right? So this is kind of the big picture of why you're going to continue to hear a little bit from me today about serotonin. So let's look at some other ideas though about what's causing that depression. It's not just the chemical imbalance. Some of the other ones that are receiving a lot of notice and research these days include neurotoxicity, meaning some sort of toxic reaction in the brain, dysregulation of our hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, our HPA axis. So this is part of how our body manages stress and activation levels. Maybe that becomes imbalanced. Circadian rhythm disruptions, so sleep disruption. Neuro inflammation, so chronic inflammation of the entire body, which includes the brain. Sometimes it gets called brain inflammation or neuroinflammation. Really starting to see a consistent pattern in the research that there is this neuroinflammation pattern present for, I wouldn't speculate the vast number of people who are experiencing depression may have that underlying inflammatory situation happening. Dysbiosis is another theory. This would be a imbalanced gut bacteria population. And when you've got the wrong kinds of gut bugs going on, they release things called metabolites. These are chemicals kind of like waste products from our bacteria and our gut bugs. So if you've got the wrong kinds of gut bugs in there, they're going to release these toxic chemicals through their digestive process. This can lead to intestinal permeability or leaky gut. And remember, our gut is where 80 to 90% of our serotonin is produced. So now we have this unhealthy gut scenario and it's letting toxins into the rest of the body. This is a profound area of research around the cause of depression and also some of the cures that we do have power over. Nutrient deficiencies, addiction and depression as attachment disorders, going back to those early childhood experiences. So these are some of the new thinking about the bigger patterns of addiction and depression where we have so much power to make changes. The medical model in terms of what treatments we would go for, antidepressants are the first line answer, aren't they? I would imagine that there's some of us in this room today who have gone to our doctor, gone to our GP, said, hey, I'm feeling pretty blue these days, no motivation, tired all the time, can't get up, don't care. And some of us would have had the experience that the first and only thing that gets offered to us for support is a prescription for an antidepressant. And again, I am not bagging antidepressants. People's lives are saved by these pharmaceuticals. However, I am bagging on a system in which that is the first and only answer offered to the vast majority of people who do seek treatment at all. And remember, many people won't get treatment at all for depression. But of those who do, that's the first line intervention most typically. And when you really look at the studies, there's been some fascinating studies that have gone out and pulled out not only the published data that the pharmaceutical companies published saying, here's our amazing antidepressant, it makes everybody happy, here's the study that proves it. But there's been some great studies that use the Freedom of Information Act to request, well, let's see the results of all the studies that you guys didn't try to publish. The ones that weren't very exciting, maybe showed that it didn't actually work that well after all. When you look at the aggregate of all of the studies on the antidepressants, what we typically see is that for many people who do have one of those diagnostic criteria of depression, taking the antidepressants works better than not doing anything. So it does work to some degree for many people. For many people it doesn't work, or the side effects are so bad that they drop out of the studies, and then we don't count them. So we don't even count them as the results of our study. We only count the ones of the people who finished the study. So it's really a mixed picture, and clearly antidepressants are supportive and do help some people. The right antidepressants help some people some of the time, but really looking at who's wanting us to go right for that is the first and only line of treatment. There's a financial stake there, in my opinion. The American Psychiatric Association makes clear that antidepressant medications and psychotherapy, that's some kind of a talk therapy, equally beneficial. And of course, it's a lot easier to prescribe a pill than it is to prescribe an ongoing series of one-on-one conversations to help us heal. And what both of these medical models are missing is that there's a whole realm of natural strategies that we can use to build our emotional and psychological resilience, which are, many of them are absolutely free. Many of them really create that foundation, that groundwork of health, mental and physical and emotional health, that might keep us from ever getting to the point of needing those kinds of life-saving medications. But nobody's making money on prescribing, prescribing that we spend more time connecting with supportive communities like we do in recovery. So maybe it's time to stop looking for single biological causes and single biological solutions that will solve everyone's depression. Maybe that's a waste of time, and instead we can start focusing, and certainly those of us here now who are not, I presume most of us are not running major pharmaceutical studies on depression right now, yeah? Most of us in this room, the place we do have power and can focus is, what are the holistic actions we can take to build that environmental health for ourselves? Like the environment of this person, what are the actions I have power to take that will be healing? So we'll look at how you can personalize a plan for healing and thriving. Some of these ideas are easier to put into place than others. Some of them might take a bit of planning, maybe some of the dietary changes we'll talk about. But think of these ideas as, we're going to do these 12 steps, yeah? 12 steps to healing depression naturally. Think of them as like little slips of paper in a basket. You don't have to do all of them, but you might kind of reach in and see which one feels doable to you and interesting to you to give a try to, and focus there and work on that and build some success there. Nothing changes if nothing changes. So if you are caught in one of those seasons of life that just feels so low and so hopeless and so hard to get motivated about anything, you don't have to change everything today, but you might hear one little thing that you think, that sounds okay. Maybe I could try that. That sounds a little bit interesting. Maybe I could try that. So just reach into this bag of ideas and keep the slip that rings true for you. So step number one, or idea number one, is writing. And I start with this one because doing different kinds of reflective writing or expressive writing is free. It's free to write. Anybody can do it. It offers insight into where our reactions are coming from, and there's a ton of research showing that different types of expressive writing are effective. One study I looked at showed that for mild, moderate, and severe depression, doing daily expressive writing exercises was effective. Even 6 months later, after the study period ended, people had really experienced some insights and transformations in their moods. And I see one person there, but I'm going to click you off. My color lava, I think. I'm going to click you off right now because I'm getting the recording for this and keeping this really clean, and then we'll do some comments there at the end. So coming back to the writing, we're not trying to change anything through the writing. We're trying to observe. We're trying to let ourselves feel the feelings that arise without muting them or managing them or fixing them. and just keep writing it out. We could also use the writing more in like a bullet point kind of way, just tracking triggers, tracking what happens, what days we feel more depressed than other days. And we could use the writing to think about our story and how we want to tell our story. Many of us might have the experience of being stuck in a pretty negative view of our story. I had all of these awful things happen to me as a child. I got into some bad relationships in my teens. I ended up caught in the kinds of addictions I was caught in. Some of us would have had incarceration stories coming from that. That might be our story of who we are, this really sad, unfortunate story. And that might be what we're used to telling ourselves. But we could set ourselves the specific writing task, write the story that way, and then write the story where you are the resilient, thriving hero who's sitting here today in a recovery room, healing and making meaning out of this life experience that we have. Tell the positive story of your life with you cast as the hero. So lots of different ways to use writing as a tool to support decreasing depression and increasing mood. And by the way, it works with online writing as well. Whatever, beautiful paper journal, writing notes on your phone, participating in online writing challenges, all of these work. One study found that the online writing might work particularly well for people who experience different kinds of social anxiety or social concerns. So lots of different options to use this free tool to address our depression. So step number 2, idea number 2 is experiments and playtime. Trying something new, anything new. When we're stuck in that rut, we're just stuck there. And any way we can step out of it helps shake up some of that brain circuitry that we talked about earlier. So we could invite ourselves to just not take ourselves so seriously and just do the thing we've wanted to do. Many of these ideas, there's research showing that they are supportive of other treatment approaches. So if you are seeing a therapist, if you are taking antidepressant medications, many of these ideas in the sort of expression and creativity realm, they've been shown to enhance the effectiveness of more standard type treatments. So this could be art therapy, creating art, seeing an art therapist, viewing art. Nowadays, even with the museums closed, many of them are doing online virtual galleries. We could view art. Music therapy, listening to it or making it, definitely enhances treatment as usual for people whose minds are responsive to music in that way. Really, this is such a place to personalize your approach. Creating a vision board, like a collage, and envisioning the direction you'd like your life to go and aiming toward that and looking at it every day. If that's an idea you're a little bit interested in, a book to recommend would be The Source, Secrets of the Universe by Secrets of the Universe, Secrets of the Brain, I think. It's by Tara Stewart. She's a doctor and neuropsychiatrist who she wrote this fun, little bit woo-woo book, but it's all about what's the science behind the woo-woo? Why does it actually work to do vision boards? So fun book if that's your thing. I recommend that. And group activities. So there's a thing called interpersonal synchrony. It means times when we're moving in sync together. We feel better when we do that. We feel connected and we feel good when we do that. So whether that's a group of us putting chairs away at the end of a 12-step meeting, or whether that's a yoga class or going for a walk with friends, TikTok counts. When we are moving our bodies together in synchrony, in tandem with other human beings, we feel better. And if we do that with people we're close with, partners or friends, again, going for that walk, doing a volunteer cleanup with people in our neighborhood, we get a direct self-esteem boost from that. And that's what the research shows. So it's like win-win-win on so many levels. Idea number 3, step number 3 for healing depression naturally, increasing social contact. This is one where many of us who are in recovery communities, we might have felt both the terror and the triumph of social contact. I remember the absolute mortification I felt walking into my first 12-step meetings. I felt so lonely and so isolated and so alone and so desperate to connect with other human beings, preferably not other dope fiends and dealers, like someone positive, and yet also at the same time terrified to be there. So this can be such a place of tension for those of us in recovery, yeah? Johann Hari says that the opposite of addiction is connection, and that is borne out in the research. Finding healthy, safe communities and other people to connect with reduces our isolation, reduces our loneliness, and this reduces our vulnerability to both depression and addiction. We look back to the adverse childhood experiences and how many of us who had those less than secure, less than safe early childhood lives, we have a higher risk of being insecure in terms of how we attach to and connect with other people as adults. We tend to have more chaotic relationships marked with more avoidance or more anxiety, and this all is the more highlighted in people with substance abuse disorders. Anywhere from 66 to 94% of addicts and alcoholics have this insecure way of trying to connect with others, simply because of our early experiences when we were too young to know anything different. And unfortunately, when we're not able to form safe and secure relationships with other people, whether that's a sponsor, whether that's a partner, whether that's friends or our coworkers, it leaves us lonely and isolated and vulnerable to both depression and our addictive behaviors. So learning how to create those safe connections is just integral to our healing from depression and healing our lives. And it is possible to heal. When we look at the attachment strategy research, there is a category called earned secure. These are those of us who didn't necessarily get brought up in those safe and secure environments, but we can learn it, we can earn it. And certainly working our steps or working our recovery program, working one-on-one with a sponsor, attending meetings, even online meetings absolutely meets the same need. Some of us will even prefer that, but that connecting with live people, absolute secret sauce to why recovery works, I sometimes think, and definitely just an integral place to focus for healing our depression, including that idea of, let me just focus on helping somebody else. Let me get out of my head, focus on helping somebody else, build some esteem there for myself. Heals depression. Magic. Okay, step number four, or idea number 4 is movement. Moving our bodies more increases our overall sense of well-being. It increases our quality of life. It decreases what some of the research calls melancholy and lethargy. It's like a little bit of a use it and lose it. Have you ever noticed that the less you move, you just end up on a TV day? You're watching Netflix, the day's going, you haven't moved more than a few steps to the toilet and back, and like the less you move, the less you want to move, and the more dull and heavy everything gets, including in the mind. Whereas on a busy, active day, you went for a walk with a friend in the morning and raked the lawn in the afternoon, and you're going to go, play mini golf at night. That busy, active day, it's almost like it just keeps itself going, and the brain feels bright, and we're using it, so we're not losing it. So we know that physical activity reduces stress, which reduces our stress hormone cortisol. This reduces inflammation. And remember, there's that brain inflammation that is linked with depression. So when we reduce our overall inflammation, we're reducing our brain inflammation. This is decreasing our risk of depression. And particularly with people in early recovery, moving our bodies stimulates the release of some of those brain chemicals that are typically low for people. And it doesn't matter how we're moving our bodies more, anything works. Yoga, gardening, walking, squash, martial arts, whatever your thing is, it's all good. But even better than good, it looks like is strength training. There's a lot of research showing that strength training is particularly effective for helping elevate mood in people with mild, moderate, or severe depression. One study of 1,800 people. So it's a big data set, 1,800 people, and looking specifically at those categories: mild, moderate, severe depression. People who moved at all had an elevation in mood, but it was particularly the strength training. And I always like to call that out. I feel like particularly women might shy away from the strength training, but it's just amazing for mood and our sense of confidence and empowerment. But could be exercise, could be jogging on a treadmill. This study of 156 people found that an exercise group as compared to an SSRI group, that's a group that got the antidepressant Zoloft, and then a combination group that had both, the results were that the antidepressant worked more quickly to reduce the symptoms of depression. However, at the end of the 16-week program, exercise and medication were both equal to their impact. And at 10 months after the study, the exercise group maintained a higher mood. They maintained less depression in the group that had done the 16 weeks in the study with exercise as opposed to the antidepressant. So it really works. It works over the long term. So let's look at food and mood now. This is number 5, step number 5 for healing depression naturally. We really want to avoid blood sugar swings. We've all heard hungry, angry, lonely, and tired. We want to keep a nice steady blood sugar situation, particularly in early recovery if we're combating depression. So that means meals that have good protein at each time, good plant-based fats, and reducing the inflammatory type foods, reducing the saturated fats and sugars that increase brain inflammation and overall inflammation. So an anti-inflammatory diet, I wrote a book on it, so I'm on solid ground here telling you whole grains, legumes, deeply colored vegetables, nuts and seeds, fish, yogurt, that's a probiotic food as well. Like these are the kinds of foods that help reduce inflammation in the body and improve gut health. Healthy fats are super important, and there's some research around using the keto diet as an approach for depression. It's really conflicting right now. Lots of anecdotal reports from people saying that keto absolutely helps with their depression, but the results from the research are very conflicting. I suspect some of that might be because the keto diet might help some people with some particular genetics or particular neurobiological mechanisms. They might really thrive with that approach for managing depression, whereas some people won't. It hasn't really come out that well yet. If you're interested in the food and mood side, I'd recommend a book called Brain Changer by Felice Jacka. She's a professor at the Food and Mood Center here at Deakin University, and really phenomenal book. So that's Brain Changer. Moving our focus toward the kinds of foods that are food/supplements that might be good for reducing depression, always starting with food first, but omega-3 fatty acids, anti-inflammatory, that's seafood, walnuts, fatty fish like salmon, and we might also take that as a supplement. It's one of those may help, unlikely to harm supplements. Probiotics, let's support our gut health, so that's getting the fermented foods, yogurt, kefir, kimchi, sauerkraut, getting that in to provide healthy gut bugs, possibly taking a lactobacillus bifidobacteria capsule as well. Likely to help, unlikely to hurt. Saffron and turmeric are spices that we might be accustomed to cooking with, and there's actually a fairly robust set of research. Turmeric's the more famous of the two. It's got curcumin as its active chemical, really well known in the science at this point to be anti-inflammatory and potentially effective against depression. But saffron, who knew? Saffron extract has a wealth of studies showing that it's helpful against depression. It may increase serotonin in the brain, equivalent to an SSRI antidepressant, and without the side effects of sweating and sexual dysfunction and all that fun stuff. Study of it with 38 people over 6 weeks, having as much effect from the saffron as from Prozac. Another study showing decreased depression in recovering meth addicts who had HIV, just like again and again and again. Tons of research there, so feel free to use your saffron liberally and think about trying it as a supplement. Looking at a little bit more of that food supplement crossover, vitamin D is implicated with mood and depression, might be partly because of seasonal affective disorder. So those of you in the States finally getting to hopefully get out of the house and get to some sunshine, that might help a little bit. Including fatty fish and fortified milk can provide the vitamin D from food sources. But if your levels are really low, that's under 20 or 30 milligrams per milliliter, or if you have a little bit of extra belly fat, either of those, you might have some vitamin D deficiency that's easy to remedy with food or supplements. Zinc helps increase the efficacy of antidepressants, and deficiency is more likely with people who are older, have Crohn's disease or celiac disease, athletes who sweat a lot, all potentially low in zinc. So looking at getting more meat, seafood, nuts, milk, or potentially taking that supplement, take that with food. Magnesium, likely to be low in people coming off some chronic alcohol abuse particularly, and also men, they're at higher risk of deficiency. So focusing on some more of those super nutritious foods, nuts, spinach, soy, avocado, oats, yum. All of these fantastic foods, great sources of magnesium, and that might help with improving it. If not, a magnesium glycinate or magnesium citrate tablet might be part of the picture. Now looking more specifically at supplements, we'll see that there's a lot out there that's marketed for depression. SAMe and tryptophan, for example, the evidence is pretty sketchy that either of those do anything. One that seems a little bit more likely to be effective is 5-HTP, that's hydroxytryptophan. That is a serotonin precursor. So is tryptophan, serotonin precursor, but it doesn't necessarily mean that if you take a tryptophan tablet or tryptophan food that you make more serotonin. However, 5-HTP gets directed more immediately to raising serotonin in the body, and that serotonin does cross the blood-brain barrier, so 5-HTP can be useful. And there's also research linking it to decreased alcohol withdrawal symptoms. So, for those of us coming off that, those benders and ready to start our lives in recovery, 5-HTP might help really bridge us from the anhedonia, lack of pleasure in early sobriety, to a place where we're starting to feel a little bit better. And acetylcysteine, that's NAC, that supports our glutathione detoxification pathways. Not tested yet directly for depression, but it is linked with reduced alcohol-induced anxiety symptoms and has been used in some treatment protocols for nicotine, marijuana, and cocaine cravings, reducing cravings for nicotine, marijuana, and cocaine, and NAC seems effective for that. So some supplements that we can look at for ideas there. What else? Creatine, for people on a plant-based diet particularly, supplementing with some creatine can help really support cognition and support mood. We're mostly familiar with that as like a bodybuilder type supplement, but especially for plant-based eaters, that can help with mood as well. Kava helps with anxiety, potentially. It's hard to get here in Australia. It's tightly limited by the government here. But let's talk about St. John's wort for a moment. This is a herb. It's probably the best researched herbal antidepressant. It increases serotonin signaling in the brain, and in many studies it's been shown to have equivalent effects to most of the major classes of antidepressants, SSRIs, MAOIs, those are monoamine oxidase inhibitors, and also tricyclic antidepressants. Those are the major classes of antidepressants. St. John's wort might work as well as any of them for some people. It is an option for those to try with severe or moderate or mild, like diagnosed depression, but not to be taken with pharmaceuticals really of any kind, but certainly not with antidepressants. At the same time, there's a lot of drug nutrient interactions with St. John's wort. It can render birth control pills ineffective, so that might be an important consideration for some of us. It can have really gnarly side effects if you take it with Xanax or with alcohol. So powerful stuff, not to be taken lightly. Yeah. Step number 8, approach number 8, sunshine and light. I'm running out of time again. This always happens. Get more sunshine, get outside, get your vitamin D and your exposure to good microbes. Step number 9, mindfulness and meditation. Again, avalanche of data on mindfulness approaches to help with mood and depression over time, relaxing, calming the central nervous system. My experience has been that meditation is not a one and done deal. It's not like sitting down, having a meditation, and wow, I feel great, that worked. Every now and then that happens. More often, what we're doing is we're just creating this space to allow the feelings to arise and pass through. We're getting to see how our mind works to provoke and keeps churning out those hopeless and bleak feelings. We're practicing cultivating self-compassion for ourselves using compassion meditations. And again, we're planting these seeds here. And like I like to bring attention to, really looking for someone who can help with trauma-informed mindfulness if you do have that background of trauma, because it's not always the right thing for everyone to sit and focus on the breath. There's a lot of ways to practice mindfulness and get the benefits of mindfulness to reduce cravings, reduce depression, and just help us feel better over time. Step number 10, get a checkup. There's a lot of physical reasons we might just be feeling crap and low energy. Could be inflammation, could be iron levels, digestive problems, thyroid problems. So clear all that out first, before thinking that there's something like wrong with you. Step number 11 to healing depression naturally, get enough sleep. There is a mutual negative impact between impaired sleep and increased substance use. Inadequate sleep leads us to be more sensitive to pain, to have more of a negativity bias in our brain, to be more sensitive to rewards. We're more on the lookout for things that are going to help us feel better faster, and it increases our impulsivity. So again, all of this sounds like a perfect storm leading us to potential relapse, doesn't it? We're just feeling crappy, we're more sensitive to pain, our minds are in a funk, and we're feeling impulsive, and like we just really want a goodie that's going to make us feel better right away. Getting enough sleep will help reduce that. It also helps us our memory consolidation so that we can learn new ways of being, new ways of showing up in the world. Finally, step number 12, self-awareness and allies. Finding the people and the supports that can help us heal the mismatch between how we're experiencing life through our depression and how we want to feel. Therapy does work. Some of us work with sponsors and therapists. I think that's a great idea because most sponsors are not actually trained in mental health issues. So if that's a concern that you have, looking at cognitive behavioral approaches, acceptance and commitment therapy approaches, or attachment-based compassion theory, really looking at how can we compassionately accept where we are right now. Look at those early childhood experiences and attachment wounds and begin to heal them using more social connectedness, more mindful self-compassion to increase our tolerance for distress so that we don't have to act out on it. And we can do some of this on our own with things like self-care assessments, but great to have help from others in some ways. So that's a wrap for me. We only are going to have a few minutes for questions and comments. I didn't see too many questions come in on the bottom there. I'll remind us all, here's my favorite thing to remind us. Let's take a kind perspective on this all. Sometimes it is hard to be human. Sometimes we feel like crap, and it doesn't seem like it's ever going to get any better. But every single one of us sitting here today is testament to the fact that we do recover. Sometimes we recover with 2 steps forward and 1 step back, but we can heal and we can recover. If you have questions about your particular situation, wondering about any of the information I've offered today, the references to any of the studies I mentioned, wanting to know about one-on-one consultations, write to me, lulu@gutfeelingcoaching.com. Check out my Facebook or website, Gut Feeling Nutrition Therapy. And, really, please be kind to yourself. We are doing an awesome job. We really are. We're getting through it. So we have a few minutes left. If anybody does have any questions they want to add in. If not, there's maybe one. Question about polycystic ovary syndrome playing a role in both depression and premenstrual disorder. Absolutely. PCOS is like linked in there, double, triple whammy with all that. And many of the strategies we talked about today, including nutrition strategies, not some of which are the same ones we talked about today, but then with some additional specifics that are aimed more directly at polycystic ovary syndrome. Those strategies can help, and in many regards they can help more than any of the frontline quote treatments we have, because PCOS is not well treated for many people. So yeah, I have one request here for the references and such. So yeah, welcome to pop me a note if you wanted to catch up on that. I will say one of the things that, is magnesium good for sleep? It can be. It depends on which type you get, because there's lots of different formulations. Magnesium oxide is probably the most widely available and the cheapest. It's also the least bioavailable. Your body doesn't get much out of it, and it can be more laxative than we'd like it to be. That's why I recommend the magnesium glycinate or magnesium citrate, both of which are calming. They're not going to knock you out kind of sleepy, but they're both calming and well absorbed. There's a couple other kinds as well. So, but yeah, magnesium can help with that. And let's see, I'm going to bring you on, person with your hand raised. Hi, welcome.